There are 42 deity names etched onto the liver of Piacenza. I've downloaded a digital mock-up of the liver of Piacenza here. I also have open in my database all the Etruscan deities. On the Wikipedia article of the liver of Piacenza, there are a lot of question marks, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a few different suggestions for what some of these names might be. I had originally looked at the liver and determined that there were a few names on it that I felt were different from what a few different sources say, in my opinion. So I thought I would just kind of have at it from my perspective in my database and using that and kind of go through this and show how these kinds of interpretations are actually done. The liver of Piacenza was an artifact found in northern Italy in the city of Piacenza that was once an Etruscan city. It's a bronze plate cast into the shape of a sheep's liver used for haruspicy, a form of divination involving the interpretation of livers and gallbladders from sacrificed animals, and sometimes hearts, lungs, or other entrails. Haruspicy was also practiced across Western Eurasia alongside Lecanomancy, which focused more on the bowels. The readings were interpreted based on how the entrails and their contents interacted with the different zones and deities etched onto the bronze plate itself. I'm not going into too much more detail than that, but I think we get the idea. So anyway, there are 42 deity names etched onto the liver, as you can see in these 42 different sections designated. 2 are noted on the bottom or the back side, so you won't see those here. They're on the other side of the liver. 16 are around the outside, and then there's another 24 in the middle areas. Many have suggested that the 16 on the outside might refer to their houses or zodiac signs or months, referred to as 16 heavens. The Romans spoke often of Etruscan practices. They talked somewhat about the haruspicy practices, and they also talked a bit about the augury, which is kind of bird and sky and lightning interpretation. In the kind of celestial framework of bird watching, sky is broken up into 16 kind of parts, and each one has a designated meaning and corresponds to 16 different heavens. Even though we don't have the Etruscans' own words for these practices, there were books written specifically for these practices by the Etruscans themselves, but they are lost, unfortunately. I'm endeavoring to try to understand more deeply how their system actually worked, what it actually meant. In order to get that kind of information, we definitely need to properly decipher the deities that are referred to in all of these zones. Another curious connection to this possible meaning of celestials lies within Strigarian witchcraft, which, according to Charles Godfrey Leland's The Gospel of the Witches, preserved ancient pagan practices from northern Italy and Tuscany. In Strigarian myth, the Roman Etruscan goddess Diana or Thana created the stars and rain by blowing into an ox bladder until it burst, thus spreading the stars across the heavens. So a connection between the heavens and haruspicy might not be so far-fetched. The 2 deities noted on the back side of the liver are the sun and moon, referred to as Tivs, equivalent to Tana, Diana, and Suri or Usul. And guess who the 2 most important deities are in Strigarian witchcraft? Diana and Lucifer. And one might assume these were based on the Greek Artemis and Apollo purely, but the Etruscan Suri, for instance, is more chthonic or underworldly than Apollo usually was. So I suspect that the satanic Lucifer of Strigaria and John Milton's Paradise Lost was originally something of an Etruscan tale, Suri evolving into Lucifer. Anyway, if the outer circle of 16 deities were these celestials, these heavens, and the 2 names on the bottom were the sun and moon, then what's the significance of the inner 24 deities? One might assume that maybe it's dualistic in that way as well, that maybe the inside are chthonic, whereas the outside are celestial. However, when we go through this, there's a lot of repeats of deities that are found on the outside within the inside, and there's a lot of different sections in the inside that have repeats as well. For the most part, it is kind of difficult to find out what the pattern of the inside really means. It could have been just practical in relation to the actual liver, and if they found some abnormalities in the liver in these particular areas, it would say something about what the haruspics should interpret from that. The right side was considered favorable, and the left side unfavorable, which makes sense because the right in many mythologies is often good, and the left often bad. How exactly they would interpret an abnormality on the right side as a good thing or an abnormality on the left side as a bad thing, I'm not entirely sure. I've heard that abnormalities of any kind are considered kind of bad, so I'm not entirely sure how that right and left idea comes into this. But again, I'm not an expert on haruspicy. I am more so interested in the mythological and linguistic element of this. So let's actually get into that. Right off the bat, we see kind of what the difference between Etruscan script and our current script kind of is. Etruscan often was written from right to left, and it could be written from left to right sometimes too. It kind of just depended on how they were trying to squeeze that information into whatever thing they were squeezing it into. But in general, here you're going to see everything is really right to left. Very quickly, Etruscan script is actually based on Phoenician, just like Greek and Roman is. The Phoenician script, since Phoenician was an Afro-Asiatic language, tends not to write down vowels. It's assumed what the vowel is based on what combinations of consonants you have. There's an argument to be made, totally tangential, that runic script of the Norse was actually descended from Etruscan rather than from Roman or Phoenician or Greek. And this would make sense because the Etruscans further north traded for a very long time with the Celts, and the Celts, of course, with the Germans. And so this entire kind of northern central Europe corridor might have been a very big trade hub. You're going to recognize some of these Etruscan scripts as like, oh, that T right there looks like a T. The I looks like an I. And the N, you can kind of, if you flipped it upside down, you can kind of say, oh, that's basically an N. It's not going to be too difficult doing this part. The difficulty is actually in literally translating what deity, what Etruscan deity that is. In this case, it's actually quite simple and it makes perfect sense. Tin refers to the Etruscan main storm god, king of the gods, Tinia, or Tins. As you can kind of see already, he comes up 3 times right at the beginning, which it makes sense. It implies that he's very important in this whole process, just like Zeus and Jupiter. Tinia linguistically relates to other kind of thunder named deities like Thor, Tor, and even Tarhuna in Hittite, Tyrannus in Celtic. In English, we actually have Thunor, which is the Anglo-Saxon version of Thor, and that's, of course, thunder, right? So that's him. He's going to come up a bit. Next, we have Sil, and what this is, most people agree, is silence. Silence is a little bit gender ambiguous, but their name is generally understood to have something to do with stars or something celestial. One part might relate to the later Roman Caelus, which is also their celestial god of the sky. But another aspect is actually night and a goddess of night. And another kind of way of thinking of the silence is they might be a category of spirits that are these night spirits of nightmares and dreams. And considering these deities are within one heaven, there is a potential meaning that at least I see of silence being an epithet of Tins in this situation. Celestial Tins, and like you have Venus Caelestis, that's like the heavenly Venus. It could also be a partnership. It could be that Tins and silence, and so like Tins and the night goddess, or some sort of coupling going on. Another thing that kind of complicates things is if there's not enough room on a particular line, they will go to the next line and kind of just cut into the middle of a word. Next we have, so we got tin again, and then this symbol here is a th sound. So I'm just going to type out our English th. That backwards F is actually kind of a V, and that V, like in Roman, actually could be a U or a V. It's kind of a U or a V. That 8 looking symbol is actually a true F. Right there we have a difficult one right off the bat. Thuf or thuf. Okay, so if you look at the Wikipedia version here, we have taken from that Vilthas, then I think they would be implying that that was Velthas or Veltumna, the one video I did on the Etruscans already, which is the original main king of the gods, and he was conflated, syncretized with Tinia and Jupiter at many times. It could be that Tinia was a totally different deity, and Voltumna was originally the king of the gods in Etruria, as he is with Velkanos, probably in the Minoan pantheon. Velkanos in Minoan pantheon also was syncretized with the Hellenic Zeus. So there's some indication that there was an older king of the gods that was more chthonic, and that was taken over by this kind of storm thunder god from more Indo-European influence. By the time the Etruscan civilization, they were actually mixing with incoming Italic Indo-European people, so they would have already probably adopted a few different deities into the pantheon and intermarried a bit. And that would then imply that the silence and then the Voltumna were somehow aspects or like an epithet of tins again, which makes sense. That's one alternative. However, I'm not seeing Velthos in Thuf. I'm not seeing it. Instead, what I'm actually seeing is down here, Tvath. And Tvath is female Etruscan goddess. And fittingly, she is the goddess most associated directly with livers and divination and haruspicy itself. So she is the patron goddess of haruspicy. It would make perfect sense that she would come up somewhere very early in all of this. So my vote, honestly, is Tvath, and of course I could be wrong. That right there, that symbol looks like a backwards E, is actually an S. Then we have the th, the N, and an E. So this one is also very controversial. Not everyone agrees on what exactly it is, and there's a lot of guesswork that goes into kind of assuming what it is. Scholars tend to assume that it's Nethuns. Here's an issue with Wikipedia right here. It does not say what the actual inscription is. The general argument is that they think that maybe some of the words were kind of scrambled a bit, that they meant to say basically Nethuns. The problem is Nethuns comes up multiple times throughout here, right? Neth, that's Nethuns. And that makes perfect sense. That's, even though it has the same letters, they're not in the same order. So you could do that, but I have a different suggestion. In line with a lot of things I've said, there is a potential feminine form of these things. So it could refer to some kind of marriage between the primary deity and 3 different goddesses, or otherwise maybe him invoking these aspects of things. It could also be that they are epithets, and that Tvath is an epithet for kind of haruspicy in general, and so Tins Tvath could mean, oh, Tins the haruspicer, right, or something. He's being associated with that. Same with silence being kind of celestial night. There is an Etruscan counterpart to the sea god Nethuns, and of course Nethuns turns into Neptune, and that is actually Thalana, equivalent of the Greek Thalassa. And it's assumed that Thalassa and her linguistics goes back to very old, possibly Neolithic sources, pre-Hellenic, pre-Indo-European, which is of course my running hypothesis for the Etruscans and their origins. So it would make perfect sense for a goddess of such status to be the one referred to here. Now, this is, again, a little bit more of a stretch for me. I actually don't know what Thyni is. I mean, it could be Nethunes, but I'm just not convinced that things could just be switched around like that casually for no reason. And I don't see that happening in other cases. Every other case seems to be quite clear. If you have any other ideas, feel free to post them in here. I'd be curious to hear them. Next, with number 4, we are leaving Tin's clones. That is a V-N-E. Vinny, but actually what it is Uni. And that is literally the Etruscan goddess Uni. And Uni is the basis for the Roman Juno, who gets syncretized with the Greek Hera, the partner of Tin's. So it makes perfect sense that Uni would be the first deity other than Tin's to be mentioned now in this 4th grouping. So the second name here is actually an M, you can kind of tell, A, easy, and E, May. In other sources, we have a reference to Etruscan Hermes, which is terms, having mother May, and that thus implies that she's Maya, who, of course, is a partner of Tin's. So what's happening here is perhaps there is a way in which Uni and May align thematically, or perhaps they're syncretized in this Etruscan version. Etruscans do tend to have a lot less of Tinia running around just making heroes everywhere with everyone but Hera. You know, the Etruscans were a little more conservative in a sense. So this might be some sort of syncretism going on. Also, in my mind, when I think of it, I know that in many Roman sources, Maya is the basis of the month of May, and Uni or Juno is the basis of the month of June. All right, so next we have Tech. This one is another one that I kind of disagree with a lot of general consensus. A lot of people think it might mean Tellus or Kels, the Earth Mother in Etruscan, right here. However, I have another hypothesis. I think Techum might be referring to Tarchon, the founder of Etruscan religious practice, kind of the patron of Tarquinia. People think that all of the Celestials must be gods, and Techum or Tarchon is not a god, he's like a founding patron of sorts. But considering the importance of him to this whole practice, it might not be so simple. And I'm prepared to be wrong and have it be Kells. However, Kells does come up pretty soon, and it does not have that spelling. So moving on to 6. Okay, here we have L, V, S, L. Livisel. It seems a little weird, right? What that is Usil. And Usil is one of the epithets of Suri and is the basis of Lucifer, right? The sun god, but with a chthonic aspect. So he's kind of like the Egyptian Ra. He goes into the underworld at night. The sun is resurrected every day in a sense. Next with 7, we have Nethunes. That's one of the Etruscan sea gods. Nethunes might have been Indo-European because of all the linguistic evidence that Nepot and all these other nephew words actually is what it means. The nephew of the sea is the original kind of idea. Next we have pretty easy Katha, and I prefer to spell it Kavtha, which is actually Kautha, as we've kind of established. The V is a U. She is the kind of chthonic sun goddess counterpart to Suri Usil as a birth goddess, and also probably celestial, having some relationship to the sun and maybe even the moon. Yeah, this one looks very complicated, but I promise we'll get through this. It's actually quite easy one because it's so long. They had room right there in that long section to actually write out basically the whole name. So the longer is kind of better for us. Phuffluns, which became Roman Bacchus. Dionysus, most likely adopted from Greek. Oh, sorry, I put an F instead of a V there. Next, with number 10, we have Selva. Selva. All right, that would be Selvans. Makes perfect sense that he's right next to Phuffluns, because Silanus, or Silvanus in Roman, is the kind of best friend of Dionysus, so to speak. He also is kind of a wild man. Selvans in Etruscan is not as much a satyr as he is kind of a young man patrolling the wilds, wearing, I believe, a bear hide, actually. Number 11, we have Lethans. It was pretty clear to me, but I am open to being corrected. Wikipedia article and some other sources have said that it's Sethlons. And Sethlons is one of the names of Vulcans, the Etruscan smithing god of volcanoes. So that was the basis of Vulcan. But Sethlans might have been an older, maybe Pelasgian name for this particular deity, although Vulcans also could be quite old too. Whereas scholars are kind of saying, well, you know, some of the words were kind of moved around a bit. And since I've already not used that reasoning for Thalana over there on the other side here, I'm not going to suddenly activate that reasoning over here. I don't see a reason to believe that's what that is, particularly because there's another Etruscan deity that has a name that fits in with this a little bit more, and that's Letham. Sometimes it could be Uns, I suppose, or Lean, roughly the Etruscan equivalent of Eleuthia, the birth goddess of the Minoans, actually. And therefore, it's like it could have been a Greek adaptation to Etruscan, but it also could have been a genuine, like, Pelasgian origin, since the Minoans and the Etruscans, I think, are closely related. Letham. Next is a longer name, and this one seems to be flipping. So I've had some sources before actually say that this is an L. I actually have a hard time finding a true source, and it's very difficult to read the liver itself without actually having it. So I am trusting whoever did this transcription that they're doing it properly. Then you can freely correct me and tell me what you think these actually are. TL instead of TN. So it would be TL Viskva. What I am hearing is Toluskva. And this is the potentially very old sea god of the Etruscans and Pelasgians that I was talking about. Might be related to the Greek Thaumas, which is a sea god, and also even Albanian or Illyrian Talas. Kind of linguistically, a counterpart of Thalassa, the sea. And a lot of scholars actually believe that what this is saying is it's referring to Tyrrhenians themselves, the actual people of the Etruscans, which was, again, a Greek name for the Etruscans, the Tyrrhenians, or the Tersenians, right? Greek and Roman name for the Etruscans. For this to be something that the Etruscans themselves referred to, it would make a lot more sense to me that this would be the probably a sea god associated specifically with the Tyrrhenian Sea. That's my hunch anyway. And here we have, again, it's looking upside down, Cels. Very simple. That is literally the same name, Kels, Etruscan Earth Mother, related to Tellus, who is Terra in Roman, right? But that Gi kind of relates to Gishar in Sumerian, and Gaia, Gi, and Gazar in Turkic. There's goddesses from around Eurasia that have this original kind of Gi reference to the earth. If you know the word cellar, which is referring to like an underground kind of place to keep food or storage, that's actually related to this Etruscan word. in Roman. Next with 14 is CVLAL, and that is actually a P, which you would think it was. Kind of looks like a P. This one's a bit complicated and weird for sure. Another one I'm not entirely absolutely confident about, but what most scholars think is they emphasize the Alp here. That's pretty unmistakable. There is a Etruscan goddess, Alpanu, chthonic goddess of fortune and jewelry and the wealth within the earth, basically. And what this cool might mean is a little more ambiguous. My kind of hunch is it sounds like Cool Sans. He became Janus, the two-faced door god, kind of guardian of thresholds in Roman. Cool, actually, I think refers in part to Kells or Chthonic and to the specific entryway that would be Janus, would be Cool Sans. And so Cool Alpanu, my hunch is that it has something to do with the doorway to wealth or to this goddess, or she's a goddess that guards the doorway to the underworld and its wealth and its prosperity. Esoteric, but so yeah, that's my best guess. Feel free to leave your guys' guesses if you have any. 15. We have a V at the beginning, which means that it becomes a consonant, right? It's no longer a vowel. It becomes V. So this one seems weird, seems strange, but actually most agree, and I agree with them. This is a reference to Vetus, or another name for Vejovis, right? And this is the basis of the Roman Jove, or Jupiter. So yes, it's weird. We already came across Tinia as a form of storm god, and then we had Vulcans come up as king of the gods. It was replaced by Tinia, and then we have this other Vetus Veovis that is a younger storm god on a chariot, but is definitely the basis of Jupiter and relates a lot to Zeus as well. My suspicion is that he is derived from an Indo-European influence, although he could have some other older influence in that name, having to do with vitality, rejuvenation, and those kinds of archetypes. For 16, the final of the celestial realm is CILENSL. Here it is, silence again. We have silence coming up, and then there's this L at the end. And my guess for what this is, the L, is it might refer to a plural or a host of these deities. So the silence E, which is kind of like the Roman double I, which is plural, or a kind of people group kind of name, a group for a host of something. And so that maybe is referring to the class of kind of night, ghost, nightmare, divination spirits in general. So if you like Etruscan, you're interested in it, I prepared with a lot of this data that I have here, an iteration of an Etruscan pantheon family tree. This is mine, and it's downloadable on Gumroad or on our Etsy at Studio Pandemonia. Now you can look up Etruscan Pantheon on Google, and you'll probably find us somewhere in the images. Right now I have like 12 or 13 pantheons and counting, but here we have the full 16 around the edge, and if you can find a pattern with this, feel free to leave it in the comments, quite honestly, because I find these very interesting but also confusing. When you actually start to look at all of this, you see that there might be heroic personas in here. They might be a few different deities like Selvans and Feflons that are similar, that are kind of coupled together. You have two sea gods, you have a repetition of Tins 3 times, you have a repetition of silence thematically 2 times, you have a version, you would think, of Tinia over here. You have this obscure kind of extra meaning added to Alpanu. You have the entire Earth Goddess over here just hanging out. It's a little confusing. It doesn't necessarily give you an answer as to what these are. So let's move on to the inside now, starting, I think, with this tabular region here. And that right there is not a P. If it's complete, it's actually an R. That's Tur. My best guess is that is Turan. And Turan is the Etruscan dawn goddess. She's more akin to Venus and Aphrodite than to, say, Eos or Aurora. The Etruscan Eos Aurora is actually Thesan, and Thesan is kind of up in the skies on a chariot. Turan is more grounded, kind of like Ishtar, also Greek retellings in Etruscan. It just takes the place of Aphrodite in those stories. Lethan. So Lethan coming up again. 19 La Sul. And my guess is actually Lassus, the kind of tutelary spirits, fates, sisters. Sometimes 4 different distinct forms that I won't go into, but in general, they're kind of a spirit class of deities. 20 Tins. Here he is again. It's definitely Tins. And Thiv. I still think that would be Tins Tivath. So a second invocation of this potential goddess of haruspicy, or aspect of Tins as the haruspicer. And as you can see, they're kind of near each other over here, but not exactly overlapping. It's not like this, which is interesting. Next with 21, Thuful Thas. I think that this is yet another version of Tivath. Now, I could be wrong. It could be Voltumna in some form. Let's go up here. Tins Neth. Alright, we know who that is. Tins Nethans. So this is a coupling of Tinia and Nethuns in some way. Now this is maybe Tinia of the ocean, or they're conflated in some way, or they're meeting up in some manner. I'm not entirely sure. 23, Katha. There she is again. So Katha, Fuf, Lus. Fuflus. So what I think that might be again is a slightly more cramped and shortened version of what we got a lot longer before was Fufluns. So boom, we have this little tabular section. Seems like a good diversity of deities and spirits and combos going on. Again, if you can find a pattern, I sure can't recognize one, and that's saying something because I love to recognize patterns. Next with the gallbladder section, let's start down here with 25. Thunth. So this one is a bit more difficult. I think when I looked at the Wikipedia version, it's a question mark. But what I focus on with this one is this right here. And that's Vanth. Vanth is kind of equivalent to Hecate in Greek, but she has her own Etruscan version kind of going on. She's got wings, and she is kind of a chthonic goddess holding the keys to the underworld. And she kind of patrols it with her torch alongside Charon. Kind of the same in Etruscan, but in Etruscan he's a bit different, more unique. He's got a mallet, he's got wings, he's a little more unique, but they're like kind of counterparts in Etruscan. Next we have Marisol Later. The first one, Maris, most likely. And Maris is the Etruscan Mars. And Etruscan Mars, Maris, is actually young. It's like a child or a youth, fully armored, and is the son of Hercules and Minerva in Etruscan, Hercule and Minerva. There is an equivalent thematically to Mars that is an adult war god in Etruscan, which is actually called Laran. I don't know if that's what Later refers to. Of course, Later sounds a bit like Latin and could be in reference to maybe the Latin Mars in some sense, is my kind of very vague guess. The other thing that Later might be referring to potentially, Lartla, which is the Etruscan kind of chthonic god of fire and death. He's a bit like Hades. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that it could be, the Lotr could be the Lares, the Lares, which are the kind of home domestic spirits that also are worshipped by the Romans later. If you have any other ideas, feel free to share them, but that I think is my best guess. 27. Lita. Etruscan translation of Leda, the Spartan queen who had the twins Castor and Pollux, and also Helena and Clytemnestra. Next, we have our favorite. Yeah, so that's Neptune's again. He keeps coming up. I wonder why he's so important, Neptune. And now we're done with the gallbladder, so yeah, weird, interesting pattern. Not sure if I can tell exactly what it is, but moving on to 29. H. So Herc. Yep, that's Hercule. That's Etruscan Hercules. So we got some heroic personas on here. Another reason why Tarchon is not so alien to be here, even if he's on the celestial outside. It's not so crazy to have heroes showing up amidst all these gods. 30. This one is, you can almost see it just by reading it in general. We've got Mar, and we just kind of talked about that. Maris. Hercule, again, is father of Maris in Etruscan, so it makes sense for them to be kind of over here hanging out. Mar is also here. So Maris is showing up in two places, and of course this means that he's actually being written down on the liver two places. So we count it twice, even though it's really kind of the same region. But this might be a way for, like, if they're on this side or this side, they can still see the name. And it might mean the same thing. I'm also going to skip ahead and finish this one, because I don't need to go in any particular order. I'm just kind of filling this out, you know. Once again, we got that weird thing where the N or the L, who knows what it is. Again, I'm going to assume in my part that this is Toluskva, the Etruscan sea god. Let's go over here, make some room for 37. We're almost there, folks. So that's Letham. Look at that. Who do we have? Letham. This is an example of it being a full name. Why would they spell it like this when they could spell it like this? And I simply say, oh, well, this is because there's more room here. This is a really big space. It has just more room. And I do suspect that the N and the M are interchangeable at times, that the N is kind of a shorter hand form of N. So again, birth goddess showing up right here. She is all over the place, which makes sense. It's a very fatal concept, birth. You know, 38 is a very interesting one. You know, something like Meltham. Some of my sources, it's showing it as Multham or Methulm. The closest thing in Etruscan that I could find to this name. Potentially goddess of love and health in Etruscan. Munthuk. It's kind of spelling like that, but this is one of them that, again, I'm a little weaker on. Because Meltham sounds to me almost like the Phoenician and Semitic Malcolm, Melkart. He's basically their kind of heroic smithing creator god of the Phoenicians, and of course the Phoenicians did interact with the Etruscans a bit, but I've actually found that there's not too many deities in Etruscan that really do come from Phoenician sources. A lot more of them seem to be Greek, and a lot of the Greek ones, there's some older sounding ones like Tuluskva and whatnot that imply a Pelasgian, old pre-Indo-European kind of root to these names. Now we're getting into this final section. We're in the final run, the final countdown. Looks like we're going from right to left again here. Selva. Yep. That is the same word right here. So it looks like it's repeated again. Selvans. Interesting. So that's one of the first ones we see that actually is really touching 32. Letha. And this is Letham. Yep, we got my favorite. Once again, Tuluskva. You can see there's an N in this one, but an L in this one. 34, the way that they're spelling it is Nivison. Well, to be honest, that's not usually the version that I see. If those are L's, that's usil again, which makes much more sense. And then the second word here is officially, I think, the first time that we actually see my personal favorite Etruscan deity, usil Voltumna, or more properly for this particular spelling, Veltha. Very interesting to have those two together. It would imply Veltha, Voltumna has something to do with the sun, or that the sun has something to do with maybe the chthonic realm, or maybe it's the chthonic sun. The sun where Veltha is, kind of a chthonic earthly deity. Oh, one potential interpretation is that if it's not Veltha, Velcans, and if that's the case, that's Vulcan, right? That's the smithing god. That would make some sense with Usul, because if Usul's a chthonic sun god, one might interpret that as being a volcano. It's important to distinguish between Velcans and Veltha, but there are some overlapping themes from time to time. In Minoan, Velcanos, which is most likely, very likely, the same as Voltumna, he actually teaches smithing to the people. And so there's a lot of ideas about him that overlap with what, like, say, Hephaestus or Vulcan does. And then the Lemnos Islands, which have a direct linguistic relationship to Etruscan Tyrrhenian languages, Vulcan is the sacred patron of Lemnos. Vulcan cults there that have to do with him and his partnership with a Cybele-like goddess, actually, in Lemnos. And that would all imply that maybe there is some relationship between Vulcan, Hephaestus, and Voltumna and all of that. That's the thing, I don't think I went into too much depth in my Voltumna video, but it is a possibility for sure. Satyr. Yep. And S. Satyrus. Yep. So that is, without a doubt, Satres. So Satres is actually Saturn. Saturnus, right? Kronos. But yeah, that's interesting because you have this potential Volcanos or chthonic sun next to this deeply chthonic deity, Kronos. And Kronos in Etruscan has lightning powers along with a lot of other things. And that actually reminds me a bit of more Near Eastern stuff like Sumerian with Enlil. Because Enlil is a god of the mountains, and the Greeks and Romans conflated him fittingly with Kronos, with Saturnus, because he's a king of the gods, he's a mountain god, and he's ultimately kind of usurped in a way by Marduk, the Babylonian thunder god. And a lot of his overlaps are with Zeus and Jupiter, of course. And so this idea that the mountain god could be a storm god and a wind god as well, like Enlil is, and also in a way like Satres is. But finally, the last one. I will stop yammering and I will finish this off. I think you could predict what this is going to be. Silen. So we have Silen there. Again, we dropped the S and we don't have kind of the ill, which implies a class. Because this area, again, this is the left side of the liver. So this is like bad omens. This is misfortune. So it could be a kind of darker night goddess or nightmare aspect of the silence. It's alongside Satr, who Satres, of course, is still demonized in Etruscan sources because he has a lot of that syncretism with Kronos and the Greek myth of Kronos being, doing the heinous things that he does. So yes, we have the whole thing here. Feel free to take a little picture of this for your own memory and whatnot. I will be using this and things like this in my own database to try to make sense of what these could possibly mean. You can see that there's many choices I made that are choices and that could go either way and could have some other spelling, some other deity that is a much better fit than the ones I chose to do. So again, if you have some questions, if you have some alternative ideas, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe if you want more of this type of thing. Certainly like it, help me in the algorithm to make sure that I can continue to do these kinds of deep dives. Me and my Discord server are currently working on some other projects like Deciphering Linear A, which is the Minoan script, of course. I also wanted to almost look and see if, looking at the Etruscan script and then looking at the Norse Futhark script and trying to see if there's some commonality with some of the mythic motifs and names and words that are used in those letters for both of them. Anyhow, I hope this was informative, or at least entertaining, or at least interesting, or maybe you skipped through and just found out what the answers was at the end of it all. But thanks for joining me in my my nerdy research hour. See you next time.